One also has to highlight that it's not just longer lasting than traditional anesthetics, it's also opioid free, which is a big thing in anesthetics.
They were the centre of controversy. They have 200 pubs around Australia and they banned Australia Day celebrations. They backed down, but they directed staff, and I'll quote here, not to specifically celebrate a day that causes hurt for some of our patrons and our team.
And obviously the government has commented before, and the Prime Minister has commented that, you know, they're still a bit worried that tourism hasn't got back yet to pre-COVID levels, so they want to really see that lift.
I just think he's going to be so utterly ruthless and determined. So, to sum it up, do I think he's personally changed? No, but we're dealing with, you know, Trump 201 here, and he's got more firepower, much more firepower.
Kia ora, welcome to the weekly wrap where we go over MBR's top video stories from the past week. First up, New Zealand's largest independent science centre, the Cawthorn Institute, is struggling to get funding for research into an algae-based local anaesthetic, which it says has billion-dollar potential. Join MBR's Kate McVicker as she investigates the fight for more funding.
This has not been done before. Almost sounds too good to be true.
This presents an opportunity for the world to crack the opioid issue.
This actually would be something that might be considered as a Nobel Prize in medicine.
I like to think of us largely as an aquaculture institute, but I guess an aquaculture institute that goes beyond just growing seafood and species that live in the water. We have all the bells and whistles, so we can understand the composition of the things that we grow in the sea, from the good things, the bad things.
Cawthorn is an independent science institute based in Nelson.
We face numerous challenges out there: climate change and biodiversity loss and food security going forward. And from a science perspective, we've got the solutions at our fingertips. It is a matter of actually coming together and making sure that we impactfully implement these, then also find the necessary financing to do that.
One of the challenges that Cawthorn is addressing is anaesthetic, pain medication.
We hold a very significant microalgal culture collection at Cawthorn, possibly one of the largest in the world. We have 700 different strains of microalgae at the moment.
Our knowledge around microalgae, for example, that we've been working on for various decades now, at least 3 decades, understanding the toxins they produce, how they impact on seafood safety, and we've been able to derive a certain toxin to such purity that has been advanced, and an anaesthetic can now be a long-lasting pain relief, can be produced from that. We've done phase 1 trials with that, what we call neosaxitoxin, in collaboration with Harvard Medical School and the Boston Children's Hospital. Phase 1 trials were incredibly successful.
That particular toxin is known for sort of potence of biological properties as well. Is there any sort of risk of misuse with that?
I guess that is the intention of the clinical trials that are undertaken, to verify the safety of the compound, and the phase 1 clinical trials are extremely positive that it's a highly effective local anaesthetic. And phase 2 and phase 3 would verify that. It's all about the dose, so at very small doses it's beneficial, at very high doses it can be lethal.
One also has to highlight that it's not just longer lasting than traditional anesthetics, it's also opioid free, which is a big thing in anesthetics. We find it very difficult to attract funding for phase 2, mainly because we have to deal with international pharma. And the question is always, to what degree does New Zealand actually support your endeavours here? And at the moment, that is not happening. I think possibly because this is a very new environment. But there is this element of us having the IP for that extraction. Others have tried it and always failed. There's a synthetic step included as well that we've been able to identify and perfect. So this is a wonderful opportunity really for New Zealand to create big value. The amazing thing is that global demand is estimated to probably only be about 1 kilo of this powder. That's how potent it is. And every gram sells for possibly $1 million. So that's a $1 billion industry right there. But it does take a bit of an investment to get there. But that is all within the realm of possibilities. It's not something that is far-fetched. It would be wonderful to bring that to life, to also highlight that aquaculture is actually possible of creating very different value well beyond just harvesting fish or mussels out there in the ocean.
Cawthron estimates that Phase 2 trials would cost between $30 million and $40 million.
Is it disheartening for your future research when something like this hasn't been taken on board by the relevant parties?
Well, it is certainly frustrating to understand that there is a solution at our fingertips, and it is so difficult to get the necessary funding to take this further. And one also has to take into account it is usually not in the remit of a science institute to go out there and seek massive funding to bring something to life. You would usually have an interested industry partner who approaches you and says, I have an idea. So this is a bit the other way around here.
While Cawthron would prefer to partner with a domestic investor, it may have to consider looking overseas.
We are already looking internationally, but that's where we face those questions of, but why don't you fund that yourself? This is such a wonderful opportunity. And we are also a little hesitant to just give this away to an international partner and with that lose the opportunity for New Zealand. And while everybody agrees that this is a fantastic opportunity, I think the reluctance is probably based on the fact that this has not been done before. Almost sounds too good to be true. We are making progress with one international party at the moment that appears to be very interested in actually taking this forward. But I'm still trying to somehow convince local industry and government to actually support this from a New Zealand perspective.
So your preference would be to partner with New Zealand?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is this a real potential letdown, I guess, if they don't decide to come on board?
I think it would be an opportunity missed. I think it would be, I guess philosophically this presents an opportunity for the world to crack the opioid issue. So from my perspective, it would be a sad opportunity missed. Yeah.
This is not about extracting or exploiting our environment. This is actually having microalgae in a bioreactor producing a toxin and then deriving tremendous value from that without any impact on the environment whatsoever. That does indeed sound too good to be true, and that would be a huge opportunity missed. Ex-colleague of mine had indicated that this actually would be something that might be considered as a Nobel Prize in medicine if this came to life. This is how we also communicated with parties, but it is also quite interesting to see how big pharma focuses on the bottom line and less on what are the other benefits that are actually associated with this product. And it's easier to use and adapt existing products in new compilations, etc., instead of embarking on something that is completely new and obviously poses that risk that in the end it may have an issue when it then doesn't make it through phase 2 trials. That risk is obviously also there. But after what we've heard, what our colleagues at Boston Children's Hospital are saying that have been very involved here, I doubt that risk is too high, but I would hope that at some stage we actually get somebody on board that feels this is indeed an opportunity of a lifetime.
Thanks, Kate, and you can read more on that at mbr.co.nz. While New Zealand has started marathon public hearings into the Treaty Principles Bill, Australia's National Day on January 26 continues to bring up issues on the history of colonisation and the status of Indigenous Australians. Australian correspondent Lachlan Cahoon with this week's Underarm.
Last weekend, Australians took a day off for the National Australia Day holiday on January 26. While thousands celebrated and national flags were in abundance, thousands also marched in what are called Invasion Day protests around the country. Well, NBR's Sydney correspondent Lachlan Calhoun also enjoyed the day off, but he's also writing about the ongoing controversy in his Underarm column this week. So, Lachlan, can you remind us what is actually the significance of January 26?
Simon, a lot of people do get it confused. A lot of people think that it was the date that Captain James Cook discovered Australia, but it's got nothing to do with James Cook in 1770. It was the date in 1788 when Captain Arthur Phillip first came ashore in Sydney Cove, so right next to the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge, and he planted the Union Jack on that date, January 26, 1788. Cook discovered nearby Botany Bay, and so the English Crown sent the First Fleet out sort of with all the convicts to create the colony, and Phillip landed in Botany Bay and discovered it was a terrible harbour. But fortunately, Sydney Harbour was very close by, which he discovered and came ashore with his Marines on January 26. So it was Foundation Day in New South Wales for many years, and only became Australia's National Day, Australia Day, in 1935. So other dates have previously been celebrated for Australia Day around the country. So as you say, it's been become highly divisive, because for Indigenous people and their allies, it represents invasion and dispossession, and they call it Invasion Day. And I'm always reminded, back in 1938, there was the 150th anniversary of Australia, and there's a great story which exemplifies the division that this creates. So they created the idea that they were going to have a reenactment of Phillip's landing in 1938. So they got some blokes and dressed them up as Marines, put them in a longboat, and they said, well, we need to get some Aboriginal people to meet them. And they went to the local Aboriginal tribes, and the people said, no, we're not going to do that. That's we don't want to be involved in that. Yeah. So they got some Aboriginal people from a mission in Menindee, about 1,000 kilometres away, brought them to Sydney. When they told them what they wanted them to do, they said, no, we don't want to get involved in that. So the police locked them up in the police stables in Redfern, forced them to participate on pain of having their rations reduced and their families being punished with lower rations. So they made these Aboriginal people perform as Aboriginal people representing the Aboriginals who'd met the First Fleet in 1788. So that's always sort of reminded me that this is an issue that has a long history, and it's still very controversial today.
So there's this ongoing backlash against it, and I understand that some people in corporate Australia have also taken a stand about it.
Yeah, so I suppose this is a part of what people would say the corporate wokeness in recent years, but it has been a very real thing. A lot of corporates will give people another day off. If you're an employee of a company like ANZ Bank or CBA, Telstra, Qantas, some of Australia's biggest corporates, if you don't really feel that you want to take January the 26th off, you can work that day, have another day off. So there's the corporates have responded in that way. Kmart and Big W, the two big retailers, they at one point decided not to stock Australia Day merchandise. I think Kmart still don't stock it, but Big W, there was a big backlash against it, so that they do now. They stock Australian flags and Australian Day merchandise. So there's been a backlash there. There was a pub chain this year owned by a Hong Kong group, actually. They are the centre of controversy. They have 200 pubs around Australia, and they banned Australia Day celebrations. They backed down, but they directed staff, and I'll quote here, not to specifically celebrate a day that causes hurt for some of our patrons and our team. So it's an issue that it goes beyond the Indigenous population. It goes beyond that, and it's having an impact in corporate Australia too.
So I wonder, is there a way to get a reading on public opinion? Like, are there opinion polls which give us an indication of Australia Day's popularity as Australia Day?
Yeah, well, actually, in fact, it's becoming more popular. Wow. Support for Australia Day on January 26 is growing. In 2023, there was an opinion poll. 47% were in favour and 39% against. So that's a substantial percentage of people who are against it. The same poll this year, 2025, 2 years later, 61% in favour and 24% against. So the other thing is it's become really entrenched in the cycle of the year. You know, you have Christmas, you have New Year, then everybody's on holidays, you have the tennis, you have the Australia Day holiday, and everybody goes back to work. This is really the first week that Australia, corporate Australia, is back at work, the week after Australia Day. So it's part of the cycle of the year. But there could be also a bit of weariness about the ongoing argument, and some people might be rolling over on it. But you'd have to say that the percentage who are against it are very vocal and continue to be so, even if it is shrinking.
Right. So it's election year coming up really soon. How does this debate play into the national debate about, you know, and the politicians as well?
Yes, well, it's all part of the ongoing culture wars, Simon. You'd be familiar with, you have those similar situations over in New Zealand. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, he's portraying January 26 as the patriotic day, and that those who are against it are in some way unpatriotic if you don't agree that January 26 should be Australia Day. So he goes hard at people who march in the Invasion Day marches. He calls out the corporates who he thinks are soft on it. So it's very much playing into his anti-woke theme, and it's borrowing a little from the Trump playbook, and it seems to be working. That seems to be a vibe that has grabbed the zeitgeist around the world in some ways. So I kind of think the two things are related. The fact that that support for January 26 is growing, as is support for Peter Dutton and his coalition, because we have an election in May. It's going to be very close. There seems to be this sort of anti-woke backlash around Australia, which is reflecting what's happening everywhere else in the world, and I think that that it's playing into the political temperature as well. And so we've had Peter Dutton out there on the hustings. We're in a phony election campaign at the moment, and the Australia Day posturing has been very much part of that.
Back home, and Economic Growth Minister Nicola Willis's first announcement in her new portfolio was about boosting tourism by changing visitor visa rules to allow tourists to work in New Zealand. Political editor Brent Edwards with this analysis. Economic Growth Minister Nicola Willis's first announcement was turbocharge tourism to shift the country onto a faster growth track. But is tourism the fast track to growth? Let's bring in NBR's political editor Brent Edwards. So why focus on tourism, Brent?
Well, I think the government was looking for an announcement, having, you know, basically appointed the minister, Nicola Willis as Economic Growth Minister, the first Economic Growth Minister being appointed. And so I think they wanted an announcement, and they're kind of the easy one to do because, you know, you can make pretty quick changes around tourism. And it's possible that you can lift tourism numbers in a relatively short period of time without any sort of complicated policy prescription. And obviously the government has commented before, and the Prime Minister has commented that, you know, they're still a bit worried that tourism hasn't got back yet to pre-COVID levels, so they want to really see that lift. Now, if they do get more tourists come in, say this year, you know, another couple of 100 or 300,000 more than previous years, you know, obviously those people spending money here, that's going to lift economic activity and give a bit more of a boost to the growth that we're already starting to see as the economy recovers from last year's recession.
So does that include these digital nomads?
Yeah, that'll include the digital nomads, but I think probably more likely is just, you know, trying to increase your level of international tourism from those people who are just coming in for a holiday, rather than those people who might come in to work as well while they holiday. But that's just another feature of it, that they seem to be placing some store on that being able to provide some boost. That you know, I don't think they've given any numbers of how many people they think they'll attract, but they're focusing on North America and Southeast Asia, and particularly focused on getting high-skilled, high-paid IT workers to come here, do a bit of a holiday with their family, obviously, but work while they're here and spend their foreign exchange in this country.
So is this part of a broader agenda?
Well, look, there is a broader agenda which kind of is almost unrelated to the tourism, but the broader agenda the government is pursuing around trying to lift economic activity, and as it says, lift productivity, you know, around reforming the science and innovation sector, boosting infrastructure, kind of doing away with regulation and red tape, which it says stops businesses getting things done, reforming the Resource Management Act, the fast-track legislation, a whole host of things the government points to, which it's already doing, much of it already in train in place, which it says will help boost both productivity and economic activity.
And does this feed into the May budget?
Yeah, well, what's interesting in the May budget, the Finance Minister Nicola Willis has said that there will be legislation related to and part of the May budget aimed at boosting economic growth. And that's separate to the stuff they've already announced. Now, she didn't give any more detail, but she said it was part of the economic reform program that they've already talked about, their economic growth plan. So there'll be several pieces of legislation. It's going to be really interesting to see what those are, which would normally sit outside the normal budget process, but she's pulled into the budget process to kind of, I guess, build on that narrative of this government being relentless on growth, going for growth this year. I mean, that's the language that we're hearing repeatedly and will hear all year.
And what does the opposition say?
Well, the opposition obviously has questions about the government's approach and, blames it for the recession being deeper last year than it needed to be by, they say, restraining government spending. Nicola Willis makes the point that the government is still borrowing, so therefore putting more money into the economy. So while it slowed the spending increases that we saw under the previous Labor government in the last few years, it's still spending more money each year. So those arguments will go on, but I guess the politics of it will play out is that the government has made a big thing about growth this year. The economy was already going to grow this year. I mean, the forecasts are, I think, for 2.4% growth for the year and 3.2% in next year. I mean, I guess the thing for the government will be is if it can achieve slightly higher figures than that, it will then really be able to say, hey, look, our policies are working, we've got the economy growing again. But even without that, it will be saying that, hey, the economy's growing under a national-led government. We've righted the ship.
Finally this week, Mike McRoberts and former New Zealand ambassador to the US, Tim Grosser, look towards what Trump 2.0 means for the world and why this time Donald Trump's America means business.
Tim Grosser, former ambassador to the United States and Trade and Climate Change Minister, has had a distinguished career over several decades representing New Zealand on the world stage, having also served as New Zealand's ambassador to the World Trade Organization. He was in Washington last week during President Donald Trump's inauguration, and we're eager to hear his perspective on the evolving US trade policies and their potential implications for New Zealand and the global economy. Kia ora, Tim.
Kia ora, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. Well, what was it like in Washington? Can you share your takeaway thoughts about Trump's inauguration speech and particularly those trade policies?
Well, and perhaps you're the type of person who will understand this better than most people. It's weird. You can sit at home, watch as many YouTube videos on what is going on in, say, Washington and listen to as many podcasts, but for some reason, we human beings, you need to be physically there to pick up the vibe, to use the usual word. I don't know why, but it does sharpen your perception. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. So what did you pick up when you were in Washington?
I picked up multiple interesting things. Let me open with a very important issue that many people have raised with me. What's the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2? And here's I don't say any of this that we're about to discuss with rock solid confidence, Mike, because this is going to morph over the next few years. And of course, it will also be influenced by the upcoming elections in only 2 years' time. And what people forget is a couple of things. This was probably the most extraordinary political comeback in post-war history in important countries. But this was no landslide. Yes, he got the trifecta, the presidency, control of the House, the Senate. But if you want to know what a landslide looks at, go back to 1984, when Walter Mondale won 13 electoral college votes. Kamala Harris won 226. But the point of my story is that 2 years later at the midterms, after everyone predicting the Democratic Party is finished, we're dead, we have to completely reinvent ourselves, the Democratic Party flipped the House over to Democratic Party control. So everyone around politics, whatever your private views are, understands and believes in the phrase, a week is a long time in politics. Well, 2 years is a bloody age. So, this is going to, my point is a very simple one. The Speaker, Mike Johnson, has the world's most difficult job, other than perhaps Jerome Powell, dealing with the President. And he's on a knife-edge majority with, depending on how you count it, 3 to 5 seats in a chamber of 454 politicians. And that's going to influence a lot of action. Now, having said that, let's then go to my original framing question, what's the difference? And I'll give you my big 3 takeaways. First of all, I doubt very much, especially talking to people very close to not necessarily Trump himself, but the people right around him, and I mean including some people I spoke to who have direct personal access to him, is that Trump fundamentally hasn't changed himself. But we have to qualify that in a couple of ways. First of all, it's well known from public statements, either Ivanka or Ivana, I forget who it was, said at the time, that they weren't expecting him to win, and certainly Hillary Clinton wasn't expecting him to win. So they weren't prepared for this, and I could add many other anecdotes in my dealings with Trump the Trump people when I was up in Washington as our ambassador. But now he's really well prepared. And so while I don't think he will have changed a great deal, most of us at that age would not change a great deal. He knows a hell of a lot more. He'll be more effective. And also, I know a lot of people laughed when they read the thing in the inauguration speech referring to the extraordinary escape from assassination he had, less than a centimetre, and he'd be dead. People laughed when he said, I believe I've been saved for a purpose. It doesn't matter what you think of that statement. What matters is what he thinks. And I think he is just, after surviving the lawfare the last 4 years, I just think he's going to be so utterly ruthless and determined. So to sum it up, do I think he's personally changed? No, but we're dealing with, Trump 201 here, and he's got more firepower, much more firepower than he had. The second thing I'd say is that what I call the Trump ecosystem around him, the people around him, I mean, they've changed. I remember going, I was invited up to the Republican Party convention in 2016 that chose him as the candidate. And I was invited by Kevin Baker, who was the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, you could argue the most important parliamentary committee on the planet. I'd known Kevin since I was chairing WTO negotiations because Kevin's strong interest in an open trade policy for the United States. And he asked me to make a speech to about 300 Trumpers. And I was having a glass of wine with Republican Party loyalty back in 2016. I'm not going to mention this person's name, but a former chairman of the party. And we're looking up at the screen of the mad MAGA people with their baseball hats on, back to front, and having a glass of Oregon Pinot Noir. And he says to me, Ambassador, these people are fucking nuts. Well, the Trump ecosystem still has got that in it, but it's much wider and different. I mean, the most obvious manifestation that all people who follow politics can grasp immediately are the tech titans led by the first buddy, Elon Musk. So, but there's some very sophisticated people around him, as well as some, I will be diplomatic, I can't break the habits of a lifetime, Mike, as well as some unusual appointments, shall we say. And they are really smart and balanced people with very different views to the, neo isolationists. So that's my second point. The ecosystem around Trump has changed. And my third big takeaway, which may be the most important one, well, in my view, is people are taking him seriously for the first time. There was a very famous and very perceptive phrase that some very smart person, whose name, of course, I've forgotten, made in 2017 or 2016, which is his supporters take him seriously but not literally, and his detractors take him literally but not seriously. Well, I'm arguing you should file that under the file for historically interesting but irrelevant today, because everybody is taking Trump seriously. Just look at the pilgrimage of corporate and political titans to Mar-a-Lago to kiss his butt, to use the American vernacular. Everybody's taking him seriously now. And that changes everything, Mike, because, you know, if you remember back to, I don't know how, I wasn't sure how much political knowledge and understanding there is when I talk about this, because it's so deep. But you may recall personally, I'm sure you do, the phrase, the axis of adults. Oh, don't worry about Trump. We'll surround him with McMaster and General whoever, you know, and we'll just work around him. I don't think anyone believes that is possible now. So in that sense, we're dealing with Trump 201, and it's a more formidable thing that this little country and everyone has to deal with.
I want to get on to talking about tariffs very shortly, but you talked about his new power, and what are we, a week after the inauguration, and Colombia has found out about that new power, you know, threatening tariffs when they wouldn't accept a military plane full of people that they were trying to send back there. So we're already seeing that power used in an incredible way, a big stick.
You're onto it. Let me try and frame this in a way that I think might be useful for people. First of all, I've made this many points in public comments before, but I'll repeat it again. It is in one sense correct to say, what's the point of trying to plan, because the guy's so unpredictable. And at the level of, you know, trying to predict precisely what he will do, that is an absolutely correct statement. But he's very predictable on what I call the direction of travel. Very predictable, including, most importantly, from our perspective, on trade. So I can't tell you what precisely he's going to do to New Zealand, for example, on tariffs. But I can tell you he's going to do something that will affect us. And there's a more complicated issue, which we should get to presently, about the permissive environment which will unleash a series of actions that are potentially very threatening to our exports. But let me put that aside and use your entree into this with the Colombia thing. So first of all, you know, for what it matters, normally I don't give my private views, but I mean, what he did on illegal Colombian migrants is what New Zealand would do if we were not protected by the world's largest moat. And people will think, oh my God, no, but New Zealand electorate would never, ever accept our being invaded by countless numbers of illegal migrants with no right to be here, with all sorts of issues coming with them. And neither will Americans. So he wants to get rid of these people. And the big issue here is how far does he go, given that there are an estimated 11 million illegal migrants in the United States, comprising 6% of the workforce. I mean, I don't quite know how people have come up with this estimate, but let's say it's bloody big. But, you know, he's certainly got to do something to arrest the incredible growth of illegal migration into the United States. That is now a political certainty, and the Democrats surely will have got that takeaway from the election right. I don't think they'll get much else right, but that's another issue. So he threatens he's going to deport them on military airplanes. The Colombian president says, no bloody way. He says, right, we'll hit you with 25% tariffs. Colombia says, fine, we'll do the same, retaliate with 25%. He doesn't bat an eyelid. They back down. Game, set, match, Trump. Now, the lesson here is that Trump's launching what I call multiple rocket launches on, quote, tariffs, Mr. Tariff Man. And he's got different targets and he's got different objectives in mind. But broadly, one can see that there are threats he's putting against people which are more political, have political objectives, and there are threats which have broader economic objectives. And there are some, as in the case of China, which are both political and economic. So the Colombia thing, as I said, this is showing how things are moving at political warp speed in Washington. That was all about politics. It was nothing to do with Colombia trade per se, right? With the second biggest target, putting China aside, Canada and Mexico, I'm not sure that you and me, Mike, could get this right. I think there's absolutely political as well as trade objectives with Mexico. With Canada, I think he was just taking the proverbial out of Justin Trudeau about the 51st state. But, with Mexico, I think he is very concerned about the evolution of global supply chains, cutting out China, yes, but them all setting up shop in Mexico. And there's a couple of issues there for us, like Fisher & Paykel and others, that we need to be watching this very, very carefully.
Yes, let's talk about Fisher & Paykel for a second, because I think Craig Investments have come out today with a report, and it gives 3 different scenarios, if you like. What can we expect for a company like Fisher & Paykel Healthcare?
Well, first of all, Mike, I'm going to make an assumption here that NBR employ you, but curiously, you do expect to get paid for this. And I'm also trying to earn an honest living. So I'm in discussions with a number of companies, and I'm prepared to working with a genuine other New Zealand expert with different competences to my set of expertise, wanting to talk to leading companies like Fisher & Paykel about how they should be preparing. Because you need not only political nous, you need deep technical understanding of the various instruments of contingency protection. Sorry, advertisement over. I'll now become, because you unfortunately refused my demand to be paid 28 billion Zimbabwe dollars for this interview. So I'll now go back on behind the paywall into the open space.
So here's what Craig Investments is saying: 10% tariff. That's their base, sort of case. Mid case might be 25% tariff applied to Mexico, as well as the 10%, and the worst case scenario might be a 20% universal tariff applied. So these are big numbers, aren't they? Yeah, I honestly don't think it's all that useful to try and put numbers. I know these younger versions of me that exist in these firms. Yeah. They're paid to build up the model, produce the econometric equation, and come up with the number as if somehow this will give people, because there's a precise number. Forget the bloody number. It's all based on a complete guess. The only thing we need to know is this is potentially dangerous, and we need to develop strategies which are sometimes at the level of the nation, and I'm sure Todd McClay and his team and the current ambassador in Washington will handle that extremely well. But there are some company-specific issues, and we don't need a number to know what we have to do. So what do we have to do?
What we have to do is sometimes generic, sometimes company-specific. But in the case of any company, like the terrific company we're talking about, which has a manufacturing base on one side of the border and a highly successful service company on the other side of the border, they need to be preparing for different scenarios, and they need to be working with the right influences in Washington. And have I got a deal for them?
With the US adopting a more protectionist stance, which countries or even entities do you believe might take up a leadership role in promoting free trade globally?
Well, I say this with obvious regret, given my career, which you summarised, that the golden era of hyperglobalisation is dead for at least the next X years.
Wow.
We are into a world of fragmented globalisation. So the idea of returning full bottle to a system which would have served our interests best, centred on the WTO with the network of FTAs we've built up hugely successfully in the last 50 years, that's gone. We're into Plan B. And Plan B, in terms of the global trading system and the case for global free trade, that's not realistic any longer right now. But we have got a lot of powerful friends, precisely because of the success of progressive Labour-led, progressive national-led governments over the last 50 years in creating an alternative future for our export economy. Because without an export economy, you don't have a first world economy. Without a first world economy, all these lovely other things that people want in terms of welfare and environment, they don't happen. So our exports are fundamentally important, and we have a huge measure of insurance built in by the fact that we got CER in place in 82. We then got the next one was Singapore deal, the foundation stone of TPP. Of course, we've now got China, we've got Taiwan, we've got Hong Kong, we've got UK, we've got EU, we've got UAE, we've got CPTPP. We're in a very good spot now in terms of preparing for a more difficult passage. So we're going to work, I'm sure the government will do exactly this, within those frameworks with some very powerful countries, and slowly develop some political management strategies. What I've been talking about in my new life is helping individual companies. And the thing that my friend whom I'm working with, who's a technical expert, I'm most worried about is a repeat of the fiasco of the kiwi fruit case in 1999, when certain people completely ignored advice and then got slapped on massive anti-dumping duties. Because what's going to happen, Mike, is that slowly, piece by piece, our competitors in the United States will see us and others as a target, and they will use the permission space and the issue of, quote, unfair trade to look to take us out of the market. And people need to have company-specific pictures built up for them, which we can help with. I'm sorry, most Auckland legal firms wouldn't have a bloody clue what they're doing on this.
I want to flip this around a little bit as we start to wrap up. And you would have caught the government's announcement to loosen visa rules to attract digital nomads, potentially Americans who have lost their homes in the LA fires. When you were over there, did you sense any interest in Americans coming to New Zealand?
There's another issue that your question just sparked in my head. I'll come to in a minute. Specifically, no. But what I remember when I was deeply involved in this issue is there was an estimate that our people put together. I can't remember. I think it was NZT was the lead agency, that there were 15 million Americans thinking very positively about New Zealand for either travel, tourism, or potentially other things. So there's this idea that nobody knows where we are. I don't think is supported by the data. And there's a lot of Americans that are aware of us. And of course, you got Peter Thiel, one of the strange tech titans around him, as an example. Now, so potentially, yes, I didn't speak to anyone there on this issue. If I were running the show now inside the beehive from which this interview in your offices is coming, I'd be also looking at Britain, because I've been told that there's been a vast acceleration to the exit doors by high-tech people in Britain. Mainly they're going to the United States and Dubai, but they have had a gutsful of essentially the tax regime in Britain and the lack of direction in the United Kingdom, the loss of confidence across both political parties. So I'd be looking at Britain as a potential target as well.
And I can't let you go without asking you, because it is, we had the Prime Minister's State of the Nation speech last week, all about growth. What are the other ways that New Zealand can promote interest in New Zealand Inc. and try and grow our economy?
Well, I mean, the number one issue is to raise our total factor productivity, and that, as the great Nobel Prize economist Paul Krugman, who's a centre-left thinker, not some extreme, right-wing pro-market guy, said, productivity isn't everything, it's almost everything. So that's the underlying issue. And I know this will sound like I'm still speaking for the government, but I think they're doing, and I think New Zealand First and ACT are playing a very helpful role here. This movement towards fast-tracking economic development is fundamentally the right thing to do. You know, of course, it's not about not having, for example, environmental impact studies so we can do rip, shit and bust capitalism. Nobody wants, well, maybe a few extremists do. But we don't want that. We just want it to proceed fast so that we don't have situations like where the people who are opposed to all economic development tie people up in lawfare to the end result that the person who's trying to do something useful says, fuck it, I'm off to South Australia and I'll build my next salmon export company there.
Thanks again for joining us. Our news team is back from 5 a.m. tomorrow with the latest business news you can use on mbr.co.nz. See you next week.